Hi, my name is April Drew, and I'm the producer of this podcast until everyone is free. 1 month ago, on October 16th, we invited Ruzuna Akoth, Shiraz Durrani, and Njuki Gidethwa to speak at a teach-in hosted by Muhammad Abdi Shukri at the Macmillan Library. This was the latest installment of an open-ended series we're calling Beyond the Bill. It's important for many who were recently radicalized by the Reject Finance Bill protests to understand that we are not the first to take on the powers that have shaped Kenya into a country subservient to foreign interests. Under Moi, neoliberalism and authoritarianism stripped Kenyans of self-determination, but many movements, including the December 12th Movement, or Mwakenya, and the Release Political Prisoners movement, fought back. In this teach-in, we are joined by organizers of these movements, plus Women's Solidarity Network, to discuss movement building, linking past and present struggles, and the role of feminist ideology and leadership in making movements resilient and successful. While we normally try to turn around recordings of our live events as soon as possible, this time we ran into a lot of sound-related technical issues. The speakers that were provided produced an echo, which was magnified in the hearing aids of one speaker, so we turned it off. And the result was an audio recording that was very inconsistent. However, we are very, 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 very grateful to Jai Aroni, who records and edits our in-studio episodes, for taking a very tricky audio sample and turning it into something that can be understood. Thank you to all of the attendees who were so generous and moved closer to hear the speakers despite the low volume. And thank you, our listeners, in advance for tuning in despite all of these issues.
So my name is Muhammad Amin Abdi Shukri, and I'm honored to welcome you all to this learning session today, which, as Wairimu explained, is part of an ongoing national conversation that goes beyond the bill that started all this. So a few months ago, Kenya went through a historical moment with what started as the Reject Finance Bill 2024 protests, and later became the Ruto Must Go movement, although it's still undergoing a metamorphosis and becoming something else, a different movement. So many were radicalized, and many continue to be radicalized by the events of the last couple of months, because naturally, repression gives birth to resistance. And if there's one thing that history of Kenya has shown us, is that resistance builds on the achievements of an earlier period of struggle. For example, the ideas and the methods of early anti-colonial period struggles influenced the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, which is the Mau Mau, in the same way that the ideas and the methods of the Mau Mau influenced later movements like the December 12th Movement, Mwakenya, and other movements which we'll be discussing and learning about today. The point is this: we're not the first to dream of a better Kenya, and we're not the first to fight for a better Kenya. So it becomes our duty to study past movements, to honor their sacrifices by building upon their work, learn from both their wins and failures, so that we can achieve the ultimate goal, which is total liberation and complete independence. And who better to help us learn about these movements than individuals who are actually part of them? And it's an absolute honor to be in their presence. Shiraz Durrani, who's written and documented extensively on Kenya and on politics of information, drawn from his own experiences in Kenyan underground politics and on work in public libraries and lecturing. Dr. Njuki Gidethwa, who's a writer and activist scholar. He's the managing editor of Ukombozi Review, among many other things. And of course, Ruzuna Akoth, who's a feminist researcher, writer, mobilizer, and women's rights defender, also among many other things. So welcome to the conversation. Before we start on the particular movements that we want to discuss today, I want to ask a general question. There have been comparisons between the current regime and the Moi regime. So how do you view the similarities and the differences between the political climate during the Moi era and the current situation in Kenya? So can we get just a very brief context on the historical and political perspective of then and now? I think both Shiraz and Juki can answer this.
There are quite a number of differences. One was in the 1980s, there was an organization. Well, the December 12th Movement, Mwakenya. Before that, there was KPU, who represented an ideology, an aim, a vision of what Kenya needs to be. So whatever activity was taking place was within that political and ideological context. Compared to what is happening now, at least there is no all-ground organization that can be called as an organizer. Ideology is an important one. December 12th Movement, Mwakenya, KPU, all stood for socialism. Here, I'm not in this, I don't live in here, so I don't know, but I hear very little or no mention of socialism. That's on one side. The other side is, Moi was openly mad and vicious. He had his special branch. He would pick up people. He'd build up a Nyayo house, torture, whatever he got from overseas, obviously. These are not his own ideas. But it was obvious that in any situation in those days, there was a special branch guy listening to you, looking at you, following you. Whereas now, it's much more subtle. We don't realize it, but that sense of, in Moi's time, we could not utter words like socialism or communism or Mao. Here probably you can, but it's, if you do that, they don't come and attack you and pick you up and put you in your house. They send their thugs to kill you or to maim you, or they send the police like they do every day in Matari and other places. There is no publicity. The mass media is also totally controlled. So people are seen to be given an impression that we are free. I was at the university this morning talking about academic freedom, among other things, and it was assumed that there was a freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, everything. But those guys who are sitting there, all the professors and all, either they are blind or they don't want to see and hear. So on surface everything is fine, but underneath there is vicious force which will take people selectively. Those who are likely to be leaders, those who are likely to be ideologists, so that and the very reason, very fact that there is no political open organization is an indication that Kenya is a state, police state. So, although there are subtle differences, overall I think Mwakenya had won. Beware of Moism without Moi. And I would say this is exactly what we are in now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Mohammed and the organizers, Angela and others. I think it's a very important point that you're doing. But my reflection regarding the dictatorship of Moi Kanu and the one now we are seeing, Ruto and KK regime, is the same in terms of the ingredients of dictatorship. They are the biggest similarities is that both Moi and Ruto, they rose from a level of acceptance in terms of by the people. Remember, Moi rose into power after the death of Jomo Kenyatta in 1978. And the first thing that Moi did is to release political prisoners, including Owa Thiong'o, Koiwa Mwere, and others. So he had a whole wave of acceptance when he rose into power, including choosing Mwai Kibaki as vice president. But a few years down the line, he was able to be so unpopular, particularly in 1982 when there was a coup attempt, because he was now emerging in terms of dictatorial tendencies. And what he did is to be able to now bring the funk of dictatorship to the country in a bigger way. So he lost a lot of confidence within 2 or 3 years. And you could see tension now began again. Jonjo, Hikuku, Anyona, and others began straight away. And this is why people like Chirazi and others went underground at the same time, 82 and 83. So he began that ground. The same thing happens with Ruto. He began with a wave of popularity, being elected like Hassan's government. But look at what has happened 2 years down the line. It is the same creeping dictatorship that we are having, to the same thing that will happen to this country. And particularly, like now, path through Jivanji, there is a whole role for the police which is stationed right into Jivanji gardens. And police are all over. It has never happened before. So we are seeing the same elements of dictatorship that we are seeing through Moi, the same that we are now seeing through Ruto. But we must always be able to think through. The dictatorship is not an individual, it's a system. It was Moi's system, which has continued through Uhuru Kenyatta, now through Ruto, the same continued that. So we must be very careful in terms of what is creeping on. Thank you.
Do you want to add on to the conversation about the comparisons between?
I don't think so, because it's not.
I don't think we need it.
You need to speak to his lab.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I was worried without I may not be very. Yeah, so I hope you can hear me at the back. No, okay. I'll try. Yeah, but I think, because your question had the word influence, how past movements have influenced what we're doing now. And of course, there's always the aspect of us learning from those who've been there before us. And I think of it in terms of continuity. The system has not changed, but it developed, like the system in and of itself has ways of always sort of like adjusting itself to be able to counter any form of insurgency. And so when you think about Moi's time and you think about Ruto as a product of Moi, it tells you something about that system, its ability to keep growing and to grow stronger, right? So I don't know if influence is the word I would use, but I think of us as learning from those who've been there before us, and the fact that we are still dealing with that system. And given our contemporary reality, that the ways in which we have to respond to that system are also changing, because the system is growing stronger and its instruments of violence are expanding and they're becoming more powerful, right? And because, like from Moi's time, you could say that the movement was somewhat successful in suppressing some of the insurgent movements that were there during that time. that it is able to reproduce. Like, think about Moi. I mean, Ruto was a student of Moi, and then him being able to rise to power at a time when, if you're not like very aware of the political realities, you'd think we live in a free world, you know. And yet people like Ruto have the ability to rise to power, you know. So I think to answer your question is that it's not so much for me about similarities, but the extent, the comprehensiveness of this system to sustain itself, you know. But also it tells us something about our longevity in terms of, you know, commitment and ability to keep resisting, right? That we are picking what we can from those who come before us, and we are developing new means. And I think that came out really strongly during the process. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for that. Shiraz, I want to come back to you. I want you to tell us briefly, give us a brief background of the December 12th Movement and Mwakenya. And as you do that, I want you to also answer this question, drawing from your own experience, or your own experience with DTM and Mwakenya. What lessons can the current movement learn in terms of organizing and organizational structures in revolutionary movements?
I cannot say I'm speaking on behalf of Mwakenya or December 12th Movement. Although I was part of it, it was a dispersed organization, so you may hear different versions of it depending on which groups you belong to. For security reasons, the organization was dispersed. People were in different units, in different cells, and you did not know the top of that cell. And that was one of the reasons why it survived as long as it did, in a way. Because it was trying to learn to survive and exist in a situation of total suppression of any freedom. And so by necessity, it had to organize it this way. So what I say is my understanding or my perspective. The whole structure was based around cells, 3 to 5 depending, and each cell had a leader who was linked up with somebody at another higher level, who was then in a similar situation of going up. So it was going up, and then down again. There was some kind of dictatorship in a sense, that when you got some orders to do, you did not have democracy to say, I won't do it. Because then there is no discipline, there is no organization. But at the same time, we had within cells the freedom to discuss issues. And then recruitment to a cell was not like in KPO, in Kano, that you fill out the form and pay 5 shillings and you get life membership. There was no such thing. It was, you were approached directly or indirectly by somebody. You don't even know you are being approached by the organization. And interestingly enough, in my case, I don't know whether it's with old men or with foolish, and they don't see the sense, they don't feel an organization. We were trying to get into contact with the underground, with left people, and I saw lots of people and I just ignored them or did not follow them. It was my wife who managed to connect with the December 12th Movement. And she introduced me to this person who then became kind of a leader of our cell. I don't know, there's some intuitive thing that women have. I don't can challenge you with that, but maybe not. So anyway, we formed groups, but then the idea was that each member in a group recruits other members. So while I was at the university, we had what we called Sehemu ya Utungaji, a creative group. We produced plays. Our play was, one of the plays was Kinjikitele Maji Maji, based on a political science play, but more radical, more related to Kenya. And it ran at the Education Theatre for 4 weeks. And my wife was directing that. So we did things like that, but we were also involved in distribution and production of pamphlets. We would write, like I remember writing the back page of Pamana 2 on politics of food. And the sources I quote were based, I was working at that time at Community Library. So I was enrolled in agriculture information. So I talked about food from a political point of view, using the resources of the university. So wherever we worked, we used those resources, directly or indirectly. Maitha Jogira's play, there's a frame where he keeps the title deed. That frame came from Community Library. I stole it. Anyway, I don't know how much time you have, but the point is secrecy, leadership, and ideology. You have to, we had to, before a person is recruited, they had to prove that they are committed to the cause. So we would give them jobs, or I would be given a job to say, print out this document. And so we had a secret printing place where my brother was also later on member of a cell. He had a basement in his house in Ngara. And because we were Asians, people thought, oh, we were all business people. And we could get away with a lot of things, like my wife would go with the car all over the place. And she would not be suspected. First a woman, then a car, a bourgeois woman, and she could do things which others couldn't do. But in that house we had, a safe house, we had a basement like thing where we had a printing facility. So some of the leaflets were printed there. So it was a vast organization, very well thought out, I think, with leadership. I would say that one of the faults, in a sense, was, and maybe it's not a fault because it was a situation that the organization did not plan for leadership to be eliminated. So you need some future planning. Like it happens in Palestine. You kill a leader and a new one is there, ready-made. They know from experience that you just can't survive without a leader. So there's a whole line of leadership. We did not do that. So when the top leadership was put in prison or eliminated or exiled, the structure started collapsing, and we who were still here, I had a very low profile, incidentally. We tried to connect with some of the people who were overseas to say, okay, you are gone, but connect us with more units so we can continue. It didn't happen. That is why, one reason why I came out in the open and wrote this, the article I wrote on Pinto, which was initially published in the university platform. I sent it to the Standard, they published it, and immediately the special branch was behind me and so on. But the point was, I was trying to make a statement that the organization was still there. I'm there, I'm still talking about the same kind of thing. But in the end, it ended in a way. Do you want me to go on about Mwakenya?
We'll come to Mwakenya in a bit. We'll also come to, there's something really important you mentioned about the pamphlets, Pambana and Patanishi. We'll come to that in a bit. I just want to quickly go to Dr. Njuki as well. I want you to do the same, to briefly tell us about the Release Political Prisoners movement. And as you do that, I want you to focus your answer on how RPP's work intersected with other social and political movements in Kenya during the 90s. Were there any notable collaborations?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Again, you know, when I was coming here and Mohammed and we met at Komos Radio, and they told me that they will not tell me the questions. It's a Mwakenya. So it's a Mwakenya. So Mwakenya is always assumed that it is pamphlet that will not be able to speak about much. Just a little bit, because things start from the past and come to the present. Of course, Mwakenya is cracked down, and Chirag will talk much more about it. It goes into exile. A lot of people are jailed, tortured, they are killed, assassinated. People go into prisons. Others go into exile in Tanzania, in Zimbabwe, in UK, in USA, many other people. They went into those places. Mwakenya, one of the cells from Mwakenya declares guerrilla warfare, led by Kangeve, Tirop, Karimidodo, you see the picture there, Odoro Mwen and Lumumba, and many others, they declare. So they go all into prisons. But also there is people who were also in prison for various reasons. For example, there were people who escaped hanging during the 82 coup attempt. When Patrias and Ochuka were hanged, there are some people who were not hanged and were still in prison. So RPP emerges from that. And then 1981 now, there is a whole wave of social movements where people are now calling for, if these people were in jail or in exile, simply because of calling for multi-party democracy, then they should not be in jail. Now we have allowed multi-party. So you remember 1981, Moi agrees to political pluralism, and Kanu is no longer the political party only. So he's agreed, and he agrees within, after much pressure, in Kasarani State. So once he does that, a movement begins, led by a few women and mothers of political prisoners, and people come at Uhuru Park. Wangari Maathai is there, young women artists are there. They are joined by other people, young artists as well. So they start now campaigning for the release political prisoners pressure group. But remember, this campaign for political prisoners, it didn't even begin in here. It even began with people from Chirazi, Durrani, and others in UK. And if you came to the launch of that book by Yusuf Hassan, he'll tell you that there was a strong committee for political prisoners that was there in UK, led by himself, Chirazi, Wanjiru Kehoro, and many others, Wangoi Goro, Latif Abdallah, Yusuf Hassan, many others were there. And it was a team that was really very vibrant. Even today you go to UK, and I think Joy Padma Institute, you'll find a lot of documents for the political prisoners in Kenya there. So it comes to Kenya, and it becomes very vibrant. At the end of it all, Moi goes to pressure of the mothers who are camping at the Uhuru Park, and he releases all the political prisoners, except one, Apinia Thiam, who was actually released now when I was there in 2007. It's when he was released from the first bunch of political prisoners. But now when the movement, social movements now has dissipated, it has left the streets, it has left the camping, it has left the hunger strike. Now, the young people now who are in RPP, people like Tirop who have been released, people like Karim Ndogo who have been released, people like Kangede Mungai, people like Eduku and many others now, they now form an organization which is known as Release Political Prisoners Pressure Group. And that is how it is now emerged. It left the streets, and we now went to the office. I was not even there, but I came back later. And I came back later when Karim Ndogo was killed. There was a lot of fear in the country, and so many people were fearing in terms of what will happen. So I took over as RPP Secretary General after Karim Ndogo was assassinated in 1986, 1987, thereabout. I was very young almost. Then at GNZ as well. So, and then, but now, RPP itself, we will not forget that to be able to push for the bigger struggle, for political and economic changes, there is no one single organization, or a movement sometimes, which is able to fight on its own. So RPP joined other civil society groups, other movements, underground organizations, and they were able to push for Moi to be able to bring a new constitution. But he was not able to do that. One of the biggest movements that we had was called, that RPP was a member of, and then it was under Karimi Ndogo. It was called the National Convention Executive Council, NCC. The same protest that you have had, for example, the GNZ protest, the same protest that were being waged by all those players in 1986 and 1987. And the same number of people, for example, in 1986, almost about 21 people were killed on the streets because then marching to Uhuru Park and many other places, marching to Kamukonji, and the state was completely unwilling to listen to the people. So it was opening fire, it killed many of us. 21 people were killed. Even today, just like the Gen Z protest, we don't know those people. We are forgetting them very fast. Sometimes we think these people should be almost remembered in a special way. But also 1987, protest begins now, before we go to the elections. And again, people are killed. I think they were killed, 22 or 23 people now are killed. The same protest again. Sabasaba, you know Sabasaba? Sabasaba is a crucial day in this country. It is when people are killed again.
7th July.
Yes, Sabasaba, 7th of July. It's when again people are killed. And that's where the beginning of Sabasaba, which begins even today. And people are killed. But the same thing that happened after Moi was pushed to the wall, the same compromise we have had with the opposition, that we were demanding that there must be full, comprehensive review of the Constitution. Moi was pushed to the wall. He was almost agreeing that we need to overhaul the Constitution. He was pushed to the wall. He could not do anything. The same thing that he has done with Raila and other people. He compromised members of parliament. He said that he will give in to minimum package the Constitution, which he called IPPG, Inter-Party Parliamentary Group, I think something like that. And that's what he did. The same Raila, the same people that you are finding here, they went to parliament the way they are doing today, and they accepted the minimum reforms of the Constitution. And that one saved Moi's government from collapse. Because I remember one of the meetings that we had at Fungamano, there was a lot of power with the people now. And I remember one guy who was then leading SDP, which now came to CPK Badai. He was called Apollo Jonjo, and saying, now we have the power now. Can we compromise? Can we say now we are the government and we convert this house into National Assembly? And people agree because we had so much power. But the compromise that was done, the same time, 1986, 87 particularly, is the same compromise that has been done by the GNZ protest. The same compromises. So history has a way of repeating itself. The key thing for us is that what shall we learn from that protest and what can we build on? But there is no movement which begins without sometimes learning from the past, but also knowing where it is going to the future. Those are the things I can give from now. Thank you. No.
Thank you so much, Njuki, for that. There's a lot of things that you said that we'll come back to in the follow-up, but I just want to quickly move to Ruzona as well and have you tell us about the Women's Solidarity Network, brief background. And as you do that, there's a question that I want you to answer. So we've seen a conversation, or rather we saw a conversation online during the protest about how certain individuals known for having very problematic and misogynistic takes were given a platform, and they were very vocal in the movement. And when this was called out, it became a whole thing of, oh, this is not the time for feminism, we're trying to reject the finance bill or whatever. So it becomes a debate of which comes first, liberation from patriarchy or liberation from economic structural oppression. How do you and the Women's Solidarity Network approach this debate?
For Women's Solidarity Network, we are a group of women who are trying to organize within our spaces to understand our political, the implications of our of the current political realities in our material realities. So we embrace socialist, feminist and socialist political ideologies. We are also abolitionist leaning. We tend towards abolitionist ideology as well as like anarcha-feminist, but that's like really technical, whatever. But the idea is try to come together and to organize and to create alternative ways of existing within but outside of capital's dictates. Does that make sense? So what we do is we are trying to, because our understanding is that under capital and under an imperial social order, violence is a fact of everyday life. And that means that in the ways that we relate with one another, even individually, like internally, interpersonally, intercommunally, those ways the violence is embedded in those things, you know. And if you think about precarity and identity, then it means that even our forms of relationship between each other, with respect to precarity here means that some of us are, for example, not able to pay rent, not to eat every day, but some of us can. But we are forced to look at each other and be friends with each other as if we are not aware of these realities, you know. And so that violence is embedded in the way we live with each other. And so at Women's Solidarity Network, the idea is to look at each other honestly and allow ourselves to both be vulnerable but also humble, to accept that whereas we occupy spaces in which we are victims of both state violence and other forms of violence, we are also political agents who are perpetuating and sustaining the violence of colonialism, of patriarchy, of imperialism. Think about all the violences. We are participants. So then, with that understanding, what are the ways or the possibilities available for us? Where do we start? How can we start? How do we begin to act better, to behave better towards each other, you know, and to see each other differently? Because we are a dehumanized people who are continuously dehumanizing each other. So that's where we come from as members of the Women's Solidarity Network. Yeah.
And then now the question about...
Okay. So, the misogynist individual's family. As a feminist, this is a funny question. Funny as in it's not funny, but it's funny. Yeah, so I think these are questions or problems that come up because of, again, let me go back to first explaining violence, because I feel like we tend to talk about violence, but we rarely unpack how that violence manifests, right? And in the way that we are raised and taught about things is that things are fragmented, our lives are fragmented. Home is separate from work, is separate from friends, is separate from all these things. And even in our organizing spaces, and even when you think about ideology, attempts to create ideologies or alternatives that would, comprehensive alternatives that would lead us to an alternative world. It could be socialist or other things, because we are always creating. We also think in a fragmented manner. And so when we are thinking about the economics and economic deprivation, we want to create an ideology specifically for that aspect of our lives, right? And we forget that as a people, depending on where capital positions you experience economic deprivation differently, right? So when we are online and trying to mobilize and organize around the finance bill, the idea is, let's focus on this one thing because this one thing is not important. But the reality is all these things are playing into our material reality at that particular point. Okay? And because for the most part, the men are usually occupying the spaces, the visible spaces, even online. Most of what do they call it, influencers are men, right? And even when they are women, we cannot say that we are politically conscious to the extent that we understand the connections, right? So we collapse into what capital or the state has offered us, that we can do one thing first and then we replace it with another, and then we can think about that other thing later. But in doing so, we end up carrying with us, even in these new ideologies that we are trying to create, the violence that is perpetuated against women, against trans people, against queer people, against poor people, right? And that's why, for example, you would see, for example, people who come from Kware and these other, you would see that they are the most hit by police violence, but you'd rarely see them speaking for themselves, because those of us who are coming from the other areas were occupying that space, and they were getting to speak for these people. So those are the problems when we fragment and try to align ourselves with capitalist ways of seeing.
Thank you so much, Luzuna, for that. I want to shift the conversation to communication and, in a way, mobilization strategies. One of the big things for us during the movement was communication and dissemination of information and ideas. So my question for you, Shiraz, is how effective were, you mentioned this and I said we'll come back to this, Pambana and Patanishi, how effective were these DTM or Mwakenya's publications in shaping public opinion and mobilizing the resistance? Also, how did they navigate state censorship? I ask this because for us in the digital age, we saw what a certain telecommunication company did during the protest in support of the government's repression. We saw what happened to the internet during the protests. It was tampered. So, while you answer the question about how effective the publications were, how did you also maneuver or deal with state censorship?
I think in the 1980s, publications played a number of different parts. One of which was to get people active in the struggle. People who were writing, who were printing, who were taking it from place to place. They were getting courage to do things underground. So we would get a notice to say, everybody needs to distribute this particular leaflet at 3 o'clock at night. And we would all do it all over the place. But that needed a courage. But that built up our confidence. So it was a way of strengthening the organization. That was more internal for the organization. The second part of it was also in writing, and about leaflets then became study material itself. Do you agree with this? What does this say? And in the process of discussion and debates, it started ideological debates and helped people to develop their thinking and make them understand socialism, make them understand other revolutions and so on. Outside was the other bit. I think one of the things was, and Moi's government used this, was publicity was given by the mass media. And Moi used the excuse of Mwakenya or DTM to suppress any opposition to him. like he used the coup to suppress any budding movement that might challenge him. But it played a part in making, I know that some of the leaflets and pamphlets was placed in kiosks. And quietly people there would read it, circulate the ideas or read it to those who did it very quietly. But one of the most interesting things was that when one of the leaflets we distributed, we didn't know where it went. But a colleague of mine in the university library, one day she receives a mail, and one of these things was leaflet from Mwakenya, or DTM, I can't remember which. Yeah, it must be DTM. And she was so scared of receiving it, and receiving it at the university, she threw it immediately, and I think she left the room, and I could sit there quietly and watch the effect. But that was a past issue. Among the, I think other people, it was different. But I think the key thing is, when you talk of mass media, we did not have the means of reaching the masses. I mean, whatever cells and organization we had, you can't call it reaching the mass audience. Whereas what we have now, if you are allowed to do it, it can have a much more greater impact. But the other thing we did was, after I went to England, I reconnected with one of the cells, which happened to be a cell in which my brother was. And he was the one who was publishing his own leaflets around, and his focus was on working class struggles. And a lot of material like that he would send it to me, as if he was sending, well, it's like a family thing, for your family. But he would write all this in Gujarati. I have some of his letters too. They would be in Gujarati, so it would be openly seen as a brother writing to the brother in a non stupid language. But a lot of information that came that way went into Mwakenya's draft minimum program and workers' resistance records of resistance. So the communication we could not open it because the mail would be open. We knew that there was no internet, but even the letters were open. But this way we tried to sort of think, all things would come through my children, and it would be in childish handwriting or something, but behind it, in some funny way, there would be some kind of a message. As to what was more effective, it's difficult to say. I think the point is, what is the content of that thing? What are you contact people? Here, what I see today is, even if you have free access to internet and WhatsApp and all the rest of it, is it strengthening your organization? And I see a lack of ideology, lack of structure to form an organization. If you're using that for that, you can still use it. We developed a whole lot of language, saying one thing, meaning another thing, like Momo did. That is still possible, even with the Facebook and all. You say one thing, it means something else. From Momo, they developed a whole new language. We can do it today. But what are you talking about? What are you organizing? So it's difficult to say, but in any situation there is going to be a problem. There are going to be problems. The enemy is not sitting there. I mean, I asked this audience at the university today, that I said, I thank the special branch because it was because of the action of special branch that Vita books came into existence. Without it, Vita books would not have come. So I thanked them, and I said, maybe there are some guys here representing special branch who take back the message. The issue is, when we said that sort of this, we were strengthening organization, we were strengthening ideology. I don't see that happening today. What is communicated mostly, it's people we meet now, which is an important thing to communicate, so that we don't live in isolation. If somebody is killed, everybody needs to know and demonstrate on that. Does that in itself strengthen your organization? Maybe it does, I don't know. But the idea that we are talking about today's problems is important. But what society, what is our aim? That is not clear to me. So maybe you can explain to me how that works.
Now, I mean, we'll come to that discussion because it's something that we want to talk about as well in terms of ideology, because in as much as there's emphasis on civic education and whatnot, there's a lack in political education and lack in ideology. But before that, what I'm getting from your explanation, or like your experience with DTM or Kenya, is there was a lot of evolution and adaptation, And I want to come to Comrade Juki. In your experience with RPP, how did imprisonment and subsequent release affect the political views of former activists? I ask this because some of the individuals who were arrested or tortured ended up aligning with the very systems that they were fighting against, and some of them are still there to this day. So how did the experience of them being imprisoned make them evolve towards this direction?
Yeah, thank you again. I will reflect in terms of broadly, and then in terms of RPP itself, but also within the movement. A social movement itself is a bigger mass body which is comprised of various things. There is liberals there, there are opportunists there is radical people there in that broad movement, mass movement. There is self-seeking politicians in the same movement. And once they join into a mass protest, like what we found in the streets, the same thing that happened, for example, in the 1990s, the mass protest to remove Moi. There are some people who are focused so much on political egoism. There are some people who are focused so much on short-term gains. There are some people who are focused on long-term gains. And there are some people who are focused on ideological gains. But the nightmare which happens in terms of mass protest is that it's sometimes the most eloquent, the rhetorics, the people who can move crowds, sometimes the people who can go to media and talk so much many good things, are the same ones who are recognized by avenues of publicity. So the same thing happened to the movement that we decide from NCC, from RPP, and from that movement. So there's some people who are so much in the media. People like Matiba, people like Chihuku and others, who are leading that mass protest. But when the protest subsided, after the compromise that was done by the political elite and the clique, those people went to parliament and others went into elected positions, others got appointed, but the mass of people who were on the streets themselves and within the protest, they didn't get any money. But the worst that happened within the entire protest is that the most ideological people that we had in the same protest, they were swallowed up by mainstream political parties. Even the same people that we were talking about who are in Mwakenya, Mwakenya of course let us split into Wake Umoja wa Kenya, led by Mandaiga Mganga, Alawiti and others. They went into mainstream political parties, Ford Kenya and others. And once they went into political parties as individuals, Awiti went into as individuals, Jaramogi, Raila and others, they were swallowed. And they have never recovered in terms of championing ideological possession even to date. So there's a big risk for people to go into mass movement without organization, but also without taking lead ideologically within the same movement. The same thing that happened today. You will find a lot of young people who were on the streets. Many people died, and I think we should remember that young girl who lost her life recently, I think Nekesa. We should be able to remember her maybe at the end of this event. You will find a lot of us will dissipate like that. They will disappear. But the people who will take over is the same political elite, is the same opportunists that were not focused on the bigger goal. They were focused on short-term gains, the same people that happened, the same people that we were fighting against. Actually might end up seeing the same traits that we are now hitting with the Ruto regime and Gachagua and many other in KK. You'll find the same traits in the young people that we are now supporting. The same caliber of politicians, the same populists, the same amassing of wealth. You could even find them appetites for wealth, appetites for money, appetite for growing, appetites for cars. Once those things are not well done within a movement, it becomes very dangerous. And actually the people who even eat you much more and destroy the spirits are the same people that you used to trust. Even the Mau Mau movement itself was not beaten, was not withdrawn so much because of the firepower from the British. The Mau Mau movement was eaten from within, by betrayal from within. Kimathi was betrayed from within, including his brothers who are now in the camp of the surrenders, the betrayal. So the same thing will happen if we don't take care that there must always be caution for us. And this is a time that we should reflect very carefully. We should be able to reflect the strongest individuals and political parties amongst ourselves to be championing the mass uprising that's happening, because we have got sort of a trust that these people will betray the strong. But once we borrow the ideas of mass media, that the mass media that is creating now new leaders, then we are going to lose very big. And these protests, just like the NCC, the RPP that was there before, it will become forgotten. The activists who have lost life, Rex Masai and others, like yes and others, we have lost, will become footprints, will become names that we shall never remember in the struggle. So we must be very careful regarding the betrayers, and politicians will go wherever they are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki, for that. I feel like that's something that had to be said. And thank you so much for saying it. Ruzuna, there's something you had mentioned about the material realities of people. And there's that, famous quote by Cabral where he says, always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, for the things in anyone's head. They are fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace, to see their lives go forward, to guarantee the future of their children. And that's the reality. So how do you think movements should address the economic concerns of everyday Kenyans while still fighting the broader political battle?
Yeah, okay. I want to come back to, I always get back to the system. I think if we understand the violence, it gets easier. I feel like you kind of figure out somewhere you can start, right? And so when we are talking about, before I come to material reality, because material reality is very contextual, right? You understand it in your own space, in the way you struggle to survive, but also as you interact with the various state formations. State formations here meaning employment for those who are employed, meaning homelessness for those who don't have a home, that's like the material reality, that you're out in the cold, that, so...
Sorry guys. Also, wait until the gun is over and then continue.
Okay.
Just a moment. There's the practical aspect of it, but there's also the Sorry guys, because not for the actual just reason, but also for the recording and just interfere with it. So I think we can continue. So I think we can. Sorry for cutting.
The question about material reality, I'm sorry, I'll take a longer route to come back to material reality and my thinking around how we can begin to respond. So, when you talked about commitment, the commitment to continue in organizing, or rather resistance towards state violence. I'm using state violence because the state is inherently violent, and in the way that it interacts with us is through violence. Direct violence, indirect violence, various forms of violence. So when I say state violence, I mean even patriarchal violence, I mean all these forms of violence. Because there's a form of predatory violence that happens, that if you assault a woman, you may not get punished. The state is okay with that. So there's a predatory nature to our relationship that is sustained by the state. Anyway, so when you talk about organizing and we are talking about commitment, we have to think about these spaces, because you've also mentioned, like Njuki, the risk, that there's always a risk for mass movements that individuals will be swallowed up. And for me, it's the word swallow, because I feel like if we don't name it, because swallowed up here means cooptation, and it means capture, right? That the state will figure out a way to dismantle or upset your organizing or your resistance. And normally it does that through leadership, through the leadership that you have within that space. It is easier for the state to work with me, talk to me over tea in State House, or I prefer a vacation in Mombasa or somewhere in Masai Mara, and we'll come to an agreement. But it is harder for the state to deal with a whole community of people who are aligned to specific goals. But you also had mentioned not understanding the goal. Like, we are there, but we don't have like a specific goal. Like, what is it that we want? But I think of it in terms of values. because we can talk about ideologies, and ideologies come with, you know, our own ways, our own interests, and the things we most hold dear as individuals. So if I'm even talking about feminism or my feminist perspectives, a lot of it is influenced by my experience, right? And it's influenced by the people that I interact with, you know, and how I grow from that. And that means that in so many ways, it might not capture the entirety of all of us as a community, right? So in our organizing spaces, then, we need to think about the values that we espouse as individuals, as communities, and how we carry those values into an ideological formation, right? Cabral is saying that for the most part, what people want is to survive and to live meaningful, comfortable lives. Right, yeah, dignified lives. When you think about it, it feels so easy. Like, so it brings you to questions like, why can't we eat? You know, why can't we have homes? Why am I living? And this, it feels what's the word for something mundane, right? You know, the ability to just eat, to just have a house, to just have healthcare, right? Then how is it that we exist in a world that only a few people are able to access these things, right? So the goal for me is, if we define and create our ideologies around this generosity and love, for me it's about love for each other. Because when we think from our individual perspective, normally we don't include other people. And they have needs that we as individuals might not have, right? So if we think from a place of love, from a place of the things that I need, others need them too, and I have some things that other people do not have, then the goal is to create a world where, what Cabral is saying, these things are available, accessible for everyone. But movement building or resistance comes in where you position yourself in a place where you're willing to commit. The other word I was thinking about is the devotion. The devotion to participate in the struggle to ensure that everybody, whether you know them, whether you don't know them, that they are able to access those things, right? So when you think about, put yourself in that position and you're going against, that means that you will have to go against this violence, right? So I will use the example of a homeless person, because a homeless person is one of the most, some of the most deprived groups, right? So if you position yourself as a resistor, right, then it means that the concerns and the material is basically like your lived reality at that particular point, and the challenges that you have to overcome in order to survive to the other day, right? To sleep, to eat, this simple things that state treats as welfare. It can give you when it's willing, and it can take them away when it wants to, right? So those are the material realities. But if we think of the fact that we just need everybody to have dignified lives, right? Then it means that we have to position ourselves in resistance to the state, which means that we are in a war zone. Because when we don't have the ability to eat, to have dignified lives, right? And the state is wielding violence. Violence here is police brutality. It's the bombs that are falling on Palestinians. And it's the things that say that some people cannot live in some parts of some parts or some location. So you think about like Karen, and then we have Kibera, and then, So in Kenya is like a settler colonial state. And that settlerism is present until now. So when we are in this organizing space and we are thinking about developing alternatives of how do we survive so that we are able to resist state violence, right? For me, it's that we have to organize as if we are developing the world we want to see, right? So within our formations of resistance, then we have to ensure that those who are members or part of that community and are most deprived are able to have dignified lives within the spaces, right? So they are eating if they can't eat. We are working as hard as we can to ensure that people are sheltered. Think about the Black Panther. They were not just a threat to the state because they did the defense thing where they had weapons. It was because they were providing for the community. They had the breakfast, they had the schools, they had the clinic. They were meeting. They were trying to meet that gap where the state was not meeting. And so part of the pushback by the state was that the state, I'll use Njuki's word, swallowed, but really captured, right? Captured that, because the state does not like to see you autonomous. Right? So the key word here is autonomy. If we can establish autonomy, right? And autonomy here means that you are able to survive without relying on state or other forms of state formations, right? That gives you the freedom to support the most deprived within your community, but also to forge resistance against the state. And I think Hamas is a really good example, right? Because they have managed to do it without the donations, the donor monies. They have created their own forms of resistance attacks, including weapons, without the state. And they've been able to sustain. So meeting material reality is ensuring through Cabral that the elements that create a dignified human are met within our space.
It was very elaborate. Thank you so much.
I said I was going along with it, so it didn't come as a surprise.
Thank you so much. I have so much to ask. Really, I don't think I'm even halfway through, but we'll take a quick break of about 10 minutes. You guys can interact and talk and get to know each other. And then
I lock the doors, they don't go out.
Yeah, lock the doors so they don't go out. And then after that, as you do that, also think about questions you would like to ask each of our esteemed panelists. And then we'll come back to our Q&A session after the break. I want to start with you again, Shiraz. There's one thing that you mentioned a couple of times that came up, and Njuki also brought up, and this is the fact of political exiles. So when the repression of the Moi regime got worse, many of the members of the movement went into exile, yourself included, but you still continued your resistance work. So my question is, a couple of questions actually. How did overseas resistance groups contribute to building international solidarity networks? And then what lessons can be drawn from their approach, or from the approach that you guys had with Umoja and groups like that, organizing, your approach to anti-imperialist organizing in the diaspora? The reason I ask this is because the Kenyan diaspora were very vocal and supportive in the recent protest and in the movement. But at the same time, they came under so much scrutiny for a couple of reasons. So how are you organizing in the diaspora when you're overseas?
Well, I went into exile in London, and in London at that time, there was a released political prisoner committee under New Weekend Bookshop, John Laros. But it was only a support thing for releasing prisoners. It was not a political movement, and it was not a Kenyan movement. It had membership from non-Kenyans, and it was a solidarity movement. Well, I would sort of say that the DTM went to London, and the first DTM cell in London was formed with 3 people. And I mean, nobody talks about it, but that is there for history. And I'll mention names because it's important, I think, now. Bogiwa Thiongo, Naila, my wife, and me. The reason is that only the 3 of us were members of DTM in Kenya. The other people in Kenya, or Kenyans were there for various reasons, but they were not part of the underground movement. So we formed this, and it was this little cell of 3 people that started mobilizing, and then we formed Kenya and Umoja. And once that was done, we linked up with similar groups in a number of other countries. So we had a unity conference where all these groups came together. It was effective, I think, because lots of people who were already in these countries had links with the mass media, had links with political organizations. And London is very well connected in terms of resistance movements from all around the world. And these groups in London and in other places, each connected with those groups. So that was the effectiveness of it. We demonstrated outside the Kenya High Commission. But more than that, we influenced the thinking of mass media, thinking of Amnesty International, and that helped to change the global thinking about Kenya.
That's perfect. Were you still in contact with the organizers or the people on the ground here?
That's another long story, because as DTM disintegrated, there were various cells who started forming their own things. And from those little things, we found out in London in 1997 that Mwakenya, in fact, was made up of people who were part of DTM. And that is when the external groups came together with this internal Mwakenya and formed the larger Mwakenya. So the Mwakenya became part of larger Mwakenya. Interestingly enough, Karimi Ndutu was part of DTM Mwakenya. He was the national organizing secretary of Mwakenya. One of the issues that we had in organizing was that we from outside put our trust in people locally who claimed to be Mwakenya, who claimed to be political and the rest of it. At the time of the Saba, we were told, we went to Uganda for military training. I was there for a while. We kept waiting because we were told by the so-called organizers in Kenya that they have 100 people ready to train. And maybe 2 or 3 turned up. Karimi was there, I was there, and a few others were there. The thing was that the purity that DTM had in terms of ideology, in terms of commitment, did not carry on into Kenya at that time until, well, we suspended some of those guys who claimed to be, although we supported them initially. Once we realized what was happening, we suspended them, and then after that, Karimi became the national organization. And he was trying to create the new Kenya in the image of DTM. And perhaps that was why he was killed.
Dr. Njuki, I'll ask you to contribute to that because following the tragedy of the killing of Karimi Ndutu, you're the one who took over from him at RPP.
Great. I think there's a fact which is mentioned so much about DTM itself. December 12th Movement. And I think one of the books which has been written, and we always tell Kirazi and others to write, is by Mwakenya, the Mwakenya Revolution, Mwakenya Unfinished Revolution. It's a bit about Fukombozi and many other things. So it's a book which is available, but talks about Mwakenya and DTM. But what many people, even talking, agree very easily, is that whereas DTM was set up mainly by people based in the universities and other places of intelligentsia, people like Kamonji, William Otunga, Chirazi himself, Maino Kenyate, Ngowa Thiong'o and others, were based in the universities. Once the movement went back now to the working class, the people who were not even educated, and once people now went into exile and others were jailed, the young people who took over DTM are the ones now who went and they renamed it and took it as Mwakenya. So people like Warilo, Kebachia, and many others, and even people like Karemi Dodo and others now. So when they are arrested now, and when they start working, and as usually happens, the struggle happens sometimes in this country in two big fronts. One of the biggest front then was the universities. Ideological classes, the lessons, ideological lecturers, people like Michere, Nkoge, Maino Kenyate, people like Kamonji, people like William Otunga, ideological lectures were there. So students were a militant force. And you can imagine in 1982, they are the ones who were mainly arrested after the celebration of the coup. So once now those people were in active resistance within Mwakenya, and they were arrested and went into prisons and others into exile, they are the ones that Karemi Dodo belonged to one of the cells which talked about. But remember, the cells were autonomous, that you could not know who is a member of the other cell. You could only know the members of the cell that you belong to. You could never know the other cell members. Of course, there was a link person between the cells, but you could never know. So the cells for Karemi Dodo and Tirop Kitur, who are students in the university, including Kangede Mungai and others, they had instructions that now is a time for active resistance. And that is an element of guerrilla warfare. And they are arrested because the state is now focused on them. The three of them, they are hiding in some place in Gilgil. The three of them. So when they are arrested now, they are jailed for many years. I think Tirop was jailed, for 15 years. Karemi Dodo, I think, was jailed for 14 years. Kangede was jailed for 12.5 years. Of course, Tirop was jailed for many years because he refused to surrender and says, a voucher does not, you cannot blame a voucher because of the presence of a carcass. You blame the people who made the carcass to be there in the first place. And that's the system. So he was unrepetitive and he was jailed. Karemi Dodo again was taken to the dock and he said, the statement which is already in Ukombozi, change like death is inevitable. And they were not. So they were jailed many years. But Kangede Mungai was injured. Remember, Kangede Mungai had tried to commit suicide when he was being arrested at Gilgil. He tried to jump over to a rail and he was injured. So out of his statements of not being militant in the cell, in the dock, but also in the state of his injury, he was jailed for 12.5 years. But after the mothers now come for their sons, including the mother of Kangede Mungai, who was now we lived with in Kibeshewo Kabete, where Machujaa Library is situated. Machujaa, I mean. Once they camped at the Freedom Corner, including Karimi's mother, who now lives in Thika. Tirop's mother could not be able to come because of the emotional breakdown. Remember, Tirop was the only Kalenjin in the entire resistance. So he was much ostracized. They were isolated as a family, victimized very badly. They could not even speak as a family because of that victimization. So when now they came back and they're released from prisons and they joined RPP and people have left the streets, RPP is formed as a mass-based organization, but at the same time now Mwakenya is regrouping. And Mwakenya now pinpoints and talks about Karimi to continue with the work that he was doing when he was in the underground. So Karimi is taken over as the coordinator. And of course, in the underground ways, he becomes as a coordinator. But Karimi is equipped with new ways of organizing. Apart from the old style of publications, psycho-styling machine and other things, he is equipped also in terms of you can recruit people from all levels. You can recruit people from prisons. Remember, RPP used to go to give people to prisons, the tissue paper, some books. They could do all that. So Karimi continues that. But RPP was a mass-based organization. But Karimi was so central in terms of recruiting even people in RPP to Mwakenya. Because a mass organization is not revolutionary. I said such a movement is not revolutionary. Such movements are always read by a revolutionary organization, which is ideological. And that's what Karimi tried to do by bringing back Mwakenya towards the picture. And that's how he was arrested. That's how he was pinpointed by the agents of the state, where he was living in Iruta. And that's how he was identified very keenly, the work that was being done, and he was killed on the night of 24th March, 1986. And when he was killed, the books that they took from his house, I think they are still at Central Police Station, although are distributed. When he was killed, it's almost like Mwakenya went to a recess. I don't think it has ever recovered, even to date, in terms of what he was doing later. Of course, other leaders came and were appointed, and Shiraz knows those people that we talk about, to lead the movement. But it was never again the same. What we didn't do ourselves, and I think this is what the movement should be able to do, is that once people organize mass protests like that and mass movements, like, for example, in RPP and other people, there must be groups, political parties, organizations, radical ones, which continues to work underground and organize a struggle in a strategic and focused manner, much more than mass movements. And this is the lesson we get from Karim. He was in the mass movement, but he had a radical organization that Mwakenya that he was trying to organize above ground, internally. And if we think that power falls, like we say on the streets, there will be people to take it up and to lead the Kenyan that we want to great heights.
Thank you so much, Comrade Nzuki. Final question for Nzuna, but please be very brief. The question is elaborate, but I trust you to be brief. There's something that Dr. Njuki mentioned about the mothers of the political prisoners who camped not too far from here at Uhuru Park, Freedom's Corner. And they drew attention both locally and internationally to reactivate the popular movement of the time. And in recent history, I mean, we saw during COVID and even before that, when there was a wake of widespread police brutality in Nairobi's informal settlements, the mothers of the victims came together and they formed the network, the Mothers Network, the network of mothers of victims and survivors of police violence and brutality. And they protested and they shed light on police brutality long before many came out to encounter it in the recent protest 3, 4, 5 months ago. While being careful to ensure you're not propagating gender essentialism, I want you to very briefly answer this. What can we learn from these women putting forth their motherhood in political spaces?
You asked me to be brief before you asked the question, so I can't guarantee you, but I will try my best.
I'll put a timer.
I think that when we talk about African mothers and African women in general, we tend to impose capitalist patriarchies, understandings of women, the Western woman. But if you situate African women in their indigenous communities and the spaces that they occupy within those communities, motherhood is a public office. It is an office that, and I'm using office here as a symbol, not this building, So when these women come out, they're not coming out because they're female, as in like sex. They're coming out as people occupying a public office within their communities and are concerned about their community members who are in fact their children, right? And you can see this from the various, do I call them tactics, or how they protest, That office had not symbols, those actions of resistance, the singing and the shouting and the dancing even, and so that you make a statement, from an African woman's perspective, these things meant something, right? And when they do those things, they expect you to understand that we are here and we are showing this because what is happening is not okay. So there's always this conflict where capitalists are married to spectacles. So when African women, for example, protest and they do the Kikuyu women and the dancing in protest, those from Kikuyu community understand what I'm talking about, and then you can ask them what I'm talking about later. When they do, the media looks at the spectacles and removes it from that context of resistance, right? Because what they're saying is, we will not accept. In our community, it should be an abomination to do this to our children. It is an abomination. But our capitalist understanding, capital only understands violence. So it creates a spectacle of this African woman who's just dancing or stripping or, it creates the madness of it, And so even us who are children of these women, look at them from that spectacle. And then now we want to develop alternative forms of organizing that are much more decent, much more, appealing and befitting of a woman of this time, right? So for me, repeat that last part of your question. Yes.
The question was what can we learn?
Yeah. So I think I've already communicated the first thing we can learn, that we must situate African women and their actions within their indigenous context, within their own understandings of their own reality. We need to stop imposing. I get sometimes really, I'm angry a lot because of many things, but also because even the way we talk about feminism and how to empower African women, to teach African women, to do this to African women. And we ignore, and I like the way Michelle says this of people, that every individual has this convocation for knowledge. We have the ability to create. And African women in their own spaces are also creating knowledge. They are creating these institutions. And so them coming to the streets is a product of that knowledge creation, community building, and understanding of violence. Both understanding and appreciating of violence, but most importantly, choosing love for community. And love here is an action, not a feeling, right? They get to express it and say, we will not stand for repression, for capture of our children. We will not stand for that. And it doesn't start with the release political prisoners, the mothers, it begins way back, during the independence struggle. It is the women who were remaining home who made it so difficult for the home guards and the colonial authorities to function that they had to resort to camps. They couldn't stand it. They were not just feeding and sustaining those who were opting for the forest, they were making it hard. You couldn't, if you were known as a home guard, they were either going to tell on you or they were going to kill you or fight you themselves, right? So it is those who remain home in the villages, in the so-called native homelands, that made it so unsustainable that in order to control, the state had to create camps, concentration camps. And that speaks to the knowledge of African women. It speaks to a whole world of experience, understanding of political realities, and most importantly, action. And I think we need to go back there because they have a lot to teach us.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you a quick question to everybody here? Mothers are concerned about their children dying or being arrested. What are the fathers doing at that time? Why is it the mothers were coming out? Fair enough. But did fathers come out? Did they do anything? Or they were sitting happily at home? This is a question. If you know the answer.
Think about it. You can answer it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all three of you, for this wonderful, brilliant, insightful conversation. We didn't, except from a few technical hiccups, we didn't really disappoint what was in the poster that was advertised, and we've captured most of what was said. As we conclude and before we open the floor, I just want to say two things. Number one, memory is also part of our evolution. We need to reclaim our memories, our collective memories, and our stories, our histories, as we've done tonight. If you're going to liberate our minds, if you're going to gain the kind of political consciousness that will make us fight, by all means necessary, to get our long overdue liberation and independence. The last thing I'll say is this, and I borrowed this from the late Japanese-American activist Yuri Kochiyama, who, when she was talking about the Black Panthers, she said, "We are proud of the history you made. We admired your tenacity to keep going. You touched so many lives. May the spirit of the Panthers live forever to destroy racism, capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism." And I will say this, that we are proud of the history that you guys and the movements that you're part of made, and we admire your tenacity to keep going. And you touched so many lives, without a doubt. And may the spirit of the Mau Mau, of the trade unions of yesteryears, of DTM, Mwakenya, RPP, and all other movements live forever to destroy capitalism, neocolonialism, and imperialism. We'll open the floor for, I don't know how long they have. Thank you. Do you have 15 minutes?
When talking about the mass movements, you mentioned that most of the ideologies who are the movements were followed up by the political parties. And you gave the example of Jaramogi, Raila, Mwanda Mganga, Arthur Wiji, and of course I'm aware that there was another political party called PDP, which had the likes of Orengo and Nyong'o, and later on they of course joined the ODM, and they changed their ways and they stopped fighting for what they used to fight for at the time. So I wanted to ask, whether even in our context, whether there's a way we can bring about change, whether we need to also join the political parties in case we also want to bring about change in the system, and if so, whether there's a way to do this without, of course, being corrupted and all that stuff.
So I think the question he was asking was, he gave a historical background, but generally the question was, certain individuals back then, of course, joined the system and the political parties. So in our case right now, if you want to change the system from within, can we join the political parties or former political parties? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, and whether there's a way to do so without not being corrupted by the system, because I think in the case of Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah. And if there's a way to do that without being corrupted, it's a very okay. Yeah.
I think lessons from history tell us once you have scored major gains in your struggle, don't compromise. Keep on with that struggle. And no matter how few you are, but that's the struggle that will win. We have had individuals before compromising and going into political parties. But using Ruzuna's words, they were co-opted by the system and the structure. And you cannot even now see them. Today, look at even the parliament. It's Orengo who was in Young Dark Things is defending the system. Look at people like Kanyang Nyong who were progressive then and were taken over by the system. See any progressive that is there. So any person who goes into the system, into the structure, you betray the entire struggle you've gone forward. I think what the biggest hope that we still have with this kind of uprising going on in the country is that there was a definite agenda, there was a definite issue, but also there was a definite population that was saying no to the system. The young people who rode to the streets and did all what they could do, almost bring the system down. Anybody who is going to align him or herself with the status quo is a big betrayer, but he or she will be forgiven, will be forgotten by history very soon. Because this generation that is rising up, and this generation will have no compromises, and people going to align themselves with either wing is going to be lost, and the history will never remember them. For example, remember now that this is the first time in history of this country that we have two blocks of what you call forces. There is the political elite, Ruto, Raila, they're one side, including Gachagua, they're on one side, and the old guys. But there's a new generation that is risen that they are now in charge of this country, even metaphysically. So the more that we don't compromise ourselves by going to join either of the barrels, as the way we call them, the way we shall be able to secure this place. And we shall be able to say what Cabral says always, secure the base. This is our base now. We should not be able to compromise. Because history has been very harsh for those people who have felt the gains were short-term and they compromised and they were forgotten by history. So we should not compromise.
Absolutely.
Okay, sure.
I started, my first question, I talked about the nature of state violence. So for me, it's a question of values and principles. Because what we are taught as values and principles under capital are in and of themselves violence. So if we are in collective action or any form of collectivism, the kinds of values that we manifest and aspire to have to be different. If you are principled and have alternative values here for me are love. A rebel, a resistor, a war resistor is a lover, right? You cannot be compromised. You'd rather die than be compromised. So it's a question of value. And if we understand, in the Mau Mau, it was if you were, the fake rebels, the Comereras, and you would be killed, right? There is no tolerance for lack of principle. What do you call an unprincipled person? Anybody that is in your collective, so you curate a collective where you don't tolerate any kind of flippancy, so to speak, and you live by these values. You don't just profess them the way capital. Capital offers you promissory notes that if you just keep grinding, you will be okay, right? But you're never okay, right? And so it's not about avoiding getting corrupted, is espousing, manifesting and organizing around reflecting values of care, love, and not just care the way we are taught in terms of I feel, you make me feel, No, it has to be that care and value manifested through action. Me caring that you eat, me caring that you sleep, me caring that if you're in danger, I'm going to fight to keep you safe. And without that, I'd rather die, right? The way there's this al-araj, that we have to, he says that we have to act all the time as if we are in the front lines of battle. If you are in the front line, there's no room for this compromise or cooptation or whatever. You'd rather die than listen to your aggressor.
So just to repeat for the sake of the recording, the question was, what do you hope that the historians and archivists and memory workers will contribute to capture the history of the time? Okay, yeah. So it's how was it captured initially, and what would you hope change to contribute that?
Okay, initially, or rather, my impression or understanding so far of how memory has been captured is that it has been commodified. So when we write books and we write history, we package them into brands. So when you talk about the Mwakenya movement, it's a brand, right? That we are selling, even like when we're sitting here, we are selling. It's a presentation of memory, not continuity of struggle. Does that make sense, right? When, especially academia, I feel is very guilty. I'm conflicted about continuing studies. I think academia is guilty because it alienates people's history from them, and then it brands it and packages it as a commodity, and then they perform it to these people, right? So, like if you think about those who come to TV and then they will tell you about this topic and what it means, we've done research, you feel so alienated because they're not trying to engage with you so that you can understand how that connects to your own, again, material reality. They're performing it for you. So they're performing intellectualism, they're performing archival of memory, And because it's about commoditizing, it doesn't engage with the substance, because it's all marketing, right? So it's reduced to this something that is palatable for sale. And therefore, we don't understand the violence that is baked into the state and the violence that the rebels recognized that made them decide, I'm going to pick up weapons and fight back, right? It's all palatable, and we think of warriors, but we don't think about what drives these people. Or what makes someone like Kimathi to stop teaching and go to the forest? So in the way that memory has been presented, especially in terms of the resistance struggle, is that the system, through academia and other formations, we have the non-profit and everything, they dilute it and they package it, brand it, and give it back to you for sale. But now, for me, the challenge for those of us who are custodians or trying to archive memory is removing it. And I think for those of us who read, if you go and check Michere Mugo's work, how to bring academia, how to bring that information back into the community, right? How to find that connection, right? Because knowledge is built within community. People like Cabral, they were taking notes, they were not publishing books. Right? They were taking notes and looking at their notes and figuring out how better to do, to resist the next day, right? So that's the role of archival. It shouldn't be in museums the way, archived so that when we sit here, we are talking about the protest as if it's something of, it should be a continuous struggle. So the challenge is how we bring knowledge and memory of archival back with the people and co-creation with the people, so that they are aware and they're able to connect with their own material realities and position them as also resistors of state violence.
Yeah, and just one point to add on to Ruzuna is to say that, for example, and this is so much written by Goge in 2 works, Calling the Mind, but also a book he's called Homecoming. He said that one of the things that the slaves in America, when they landed the shore, the first thing they lost was their names. You are given an English name, because the name that you are given, the name that you rose from, will remind you where you came from. The second thing you are given once you became a slave is language. You're taught Spanish, you're taught English, you're taught German, all those languages. Because once you have your own, once your language is gone, then you'll have no way of naming your own country and your own identity. The other thing they were given, the one thing they were given once you became slaves was religion. You could not remember what you used to worship. So all those things in terms of memory is very strong, and we always say that memory is a soldier in the resistance. And that's why in this struggle, in terms of writers, the poets, the artists, are the memories and the conscience of the resistance. They're the ones who take the struggle forward. And many years to come now, like when I was passing just outside here, I was very excited to see that we have renamed this street now here, Reject Finance Bill Street. I was very excited now. Yeah, when I go all over, I see symbols of the rejection. I know this is paintings here. When I go to, I see graffiti. This is exactly how the memories will be massacred. That will continue. And any system, the first thing it does is to destroy memories. That's why all the African arts were taken away from and they were taken over to archives in America, in Germany, in Spain. That's why you see our carvings and our statues. Our music were all taken away. So memory is very strong, and we should continue archiving these resistance. The good thing is nowadays is that, unlike our times, on the times of Chirazi and others, the memories were in terms of papers, photographs. The same thing that can now be done online to archiving for many generations to come. The only thing we should not be very careful is also that the cyberspace is also compromised. It can erase our memories. But memories will be captured. And I tell all those people, like, for example, the Ukombozi review, in the last session, in the last review, we talked about, which will archive all those songs, infographics, the poetry, the photographs, the cartoons that were done towards that. I believe that we must have a natural gallery in this country to be able to remember that resistance.
Thank you so much. Charles, do you want to contribute to that?
Just an example of what the so-called Israel is doing to Palestine. They destroy the streets, they destroy the names, so a generation from now, they don't know where they were, what are the names of their home, streets where they grew up, and then they attack the libraries, the cultural heritage. So you deprive them of culture, you take away their land. What is left then? Even if you recreate this using modern technology on a screen, that thing is gone. It's not going to be replaced. So what is happening there is when they are destroying streets, homes, buildings, it's destroying people's cultures also. Of course, killing people in the process as well. But that isn't the only thing. So we in the context of Kenya, the Okobozi Library has what they call Kenya Resistance Archives. which has collection from December 12th Movement, Mwakenya, and so on. There are public libraries, public institutions, which should have been collecting all those leaflets. Nobody dared to do it. And if we ourselves don't do it, that history will be wiped out also. So I'm just wondering whether somebody today is collecting images, stories, videos of people marching on the streets, of the police beating up people. How is that memory going to be seen by the next generation? We don't control, people who are on the streets do not control public libraries, public museums, and archives. So, and they won't do it. It is part of the organization of people's power that they have to set up systems of collecting the information, collecting the resistance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you all for showing up. I mean, it's what, Wednesday afternoon in town. I know it may be a bit tricky, but thank you so much for the dedication, for showing up, for being part of this conversation. And absolutely thank you to all three of you for this magnificent conversation that we've had. And I hope that we leave here with something. Asante.
Before we finish this session, I would like us to maybe stand in a bit of silence for the actions I talked about earlier in the day. Nekesa, Immaculate, who actually, one of the, I think many people saw the videos all over. It was a very, very lovely video of her resisting arrest for the police in a police van without fear, but also trying to humanize the whole entire police force as part of the struggle. And you could find from that short video that the police were agreeing with her, what she was saying. Mm-hmm. But normally what happens in the entire struggle, the people who are unsung, the people who are not known, once they go back to their villages, to their homes, they are forgotten. And there is no self-care for all those activists. I would like us, as we go back home, remember as comrades that you are in the street together and where he is or she is, and try to see wherever they are going. Yesterday I called Sigaragara Polytechnic, where she was presumably suffocating. But I was referred to the Dean of Studies, students, and they said they will call me back, but they have not called us back. So I think they were trying to hide that reality. Let the young people on the streets see that these young people who got lost, wherever they are, let us not forget the struggle because of the isolation. Thank you. Thank you.